رائد موني. Nice to meet you. شرفي. شرفي. What you say it like this? You are not Moroccan?
لا Moroccan.
واش؟
لا
شحال؟
من تكون. That's why I talk.
تطاون. هادي. ما بغيتش عجب الشمالي براسك عاد قلت لي ديك الهضره تاع الشماليه.
كتعجبك ولا لا؟
تعجبني بزاف. ميمكنش تنسالي معايا الهضره الشماليه.
Thank you.
شنو حبيت نقول لك؟
ماشي هو مشكل.
Ladies and gentlemen out in the hallways, please come into the Grand Salon. We are about to begin the next session. Ladies and gentlemen in the Grand Foyer, please proceed to the Grand Salon. We are about to begin the next session.
We're like, okay, we're about to go on. Why not? Let's go to
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're about to start the next session.
Let's do this.
Lights down.
People are not back from lunch yet, it seems.
Yes, but I think we need to begin because afterwards it will be too late, so
Yeah.
people will come.
Yeah, I think your mic is on.
Sorry?
Your microphone is on.
The Syrian civil war, Daesh, cyber attacks, domestic terrorism, the attempted coup in Turkey. Security challenges are proliferating, coming ever faster and increasingly from unexpected quarters. Crisis is the new normal, and people's confidence in international cooperation to address emerging threats is diminishing rapidly. This fear is one of the many factors driving the rise of nationalism and populism. But the tough rhetoric these movements offer may fan the flames of violence and unrest, while disregarding our shared values of human rights and dignity. Will these trends undermine the shared frameworks we have developed to address our common security challenges? What strategies should the Atlantic community adopt in order to address emerging crises? How do we rise beyond these challenges as resilient, peaceful nations and peoples? Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Deutsche Welle television host and journalist, Mr. Ali Aslan.
Thank you so much and welcome back here in the audience. I fully understand that the session right after lunch is, of course, indeed the most difficult one. I see some nodding heads, still some dessert on your lap there, but that's fine. You were allowed. They told me no food in the audience, but that's fine. We'll let it slide. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session, Innovative Approaches to Countering Radicalization. And I think I speak for all when I say this is one of the, if not the most pertinent question and problem and challenge that we're facing in the 21st century. So important that there were not one, but actually two breakout dinner sessions last night on this subject matter. So great was the interest in this, and I can tell you I had the privilege in being one of them, and that certainly gave me a lot of food for thought for today's discussion. I'm extremely happy and delighted to be joined by such an esteemed panel here, and please allow me to introduce them. To my immediate left is the founding director of the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Pascal Boniface. Right next to him, a gentleman who served his country as foreign minister for over a decade. He was foreign minister in Senegal, a former coordinator for West Africa at the World Bank, and currently he's the president of the Institute for Pan-African Strategies. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Sheikh Gadio is with us. Right next to him sits the director of the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. For those who are not familiar with that, it's an academic institution within the US Department of Defense. Delighted to have her here, Catherine Almist-Knopf, ladies and gentlemen. And last but not least, we have with us the director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center. Previously, he was the senior vice president of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy and a professor at James Madison University. Dr. Peter Pham, ladies and gentlemen, is here with us. Well, without further ado, we saw in the intro, Mr. Boniface, that we do live in a stage of crises, ever-pertinent crisis, never-ending crisis. Certainly in Europe, it seems that way. The topic, before we get into the first question and into a debate, I would like to participate and ask you to chime along here during the word cloud and tell me please, what in your opinion are the root causes of radicalization? What, in your opinion, are the main causes, the root causes and main causes, if you will, of radicalization? That will come up in the word cloud, and that will give us some food for thoughts. And I see people are already taking out their phones. 53, let's see if we have some words here that we have. Unemployment, ignorance, okay? Inequality, American. Okay, that's we see about that. Poverty, despair, indifference, dissatisfaction. I think there is, of course, no right answer here, Mr. Boniface. But while you're seeing these terms, what, in your opinion?
I will give another option because it's perhaps due to my specialization. I will say that the wars, the protracted wars in Syria, in Iraq, all the military intervention, all the war which has not solved, breeds radicalization. And if people are coming from France, Belgium, and Tunisia, or Morocco to go to Syria, it's because there's a civil war in Syria. And so I think that the global term, the global agenda, the geopolitics, is the first step toward radicalization.
And clearly your country, in France, it has had its encounters and tragic incidents in the recent past when it comes to attacks on your soil. Now, we're talking about innovative approaches here. Is there something where you feel that the government, the French government, could have done better?
Yes. Talk less about attacks, act more. And I think that's the fact that every time we have an attack, not only the political leaders, but also the media are putting on the front line. It's just a victory for terrorists. It's a way for them to attract more people and to find more money. And I think we must have a collective reflection how to deal the attacks. Of course, it's just impossible not to speak about. But to put it every day on the front line and to make a comparison between, let's say, Daesh and Hitler, speaking about the Third World War, I think it's a political mistake and a strategic failure.
Well, and we will talk about that in more detail in just a moment. But first, Mr. Gadio, you were a foreign minister in Senegal, actually during 9/11, is my understanding. So you served during a very critical time. And Africa itself, as a continent, and West Africa also, has been seeing its share of radicalization. Do you think the experience, the African experience versus, say, the US experience, the European experience, is there a common narrative or are they all distinct cases?
Mm-hmm. I don't think so. I think that the African context is always very, very special due to the fact that Africa is marginalized in even debates that are so important to its people. You remember the first bombing from Al-Qaeda was against African embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. The world did not really pay attention, precisely because it was in Africa. The Kenyan people who died, more than 200 people, were not given the attention they deserve, as human beings, simply. Al-Qaeda was targeting the US embassies, but Africans paid the high price and nobody paid attention. The other thing is, I believe today Africa is becoming the epicenter of terrorism. When you see this kind of square from Shabaab in Somalia, Daesh in Libya, though they say they have defeated Daesh, wonderful, if it's true. And then you have ACME and all these groups in the Sahel region. And then you say you have this almost #1 terrorist organization in the world called Boko Haram. In 2014, 34,000 people were killed because of terrorist action. And then Boko Haram was #1 even before Daesh. They killed more than 6,000 people in the Lake Chad basin, like those countries. And to this day, there's really no central discussion on the African context, the situation in the country, especially because African armies are not prepared like any other army, by the way. I don't think the US Army was prepared to fight Al-Qaeda. I don't think the French Army was prepared. But in Africa, it's even more preoccupying. Like, you have more concern when you see the situation in Africa. Those weak armies, poorly equipped, poorly funded. So everything is almost to be done. And my struggle and our struggle as Africans, Pan-Africanists who love our continent, is to put Africa at its right place, which is center stage in this fight against terror.
And center stage is also where I'm looking at. If I'm looking at the screen and I see what are the root causes of radicalization, I see the US come up. I see America, Ms. Knopf. I don't want to put you on the spot here, obviously, but some people, and it was also included during yesterday's dinner, saw that the US made a lot of strategic mistakes. The US itself as a country is perhaps not obviously but one of the main causes of radicalization around the world. Would you subscribe to that?
I think that a lot of people hold political views about the actions and foreign policies of the United States and of other great powers at different points in time. But if we look at the instances of radicalization that leads to violence and the vast array of contexts in which that occurs, I think it's hard to pinpoint that just back to American foreign policies. I think we really have to look at push and pull factors, the underlying root causes and drivers, socioeconomic, political, cultural, that can be factors in an enabling environment that may lead to violent extremism. But also importantly, we have to look at pull factors. And that can be social bonds, personal relationships, group dynamics. Why and how individuals are radicalized to the point of violence, I think, is really what's most important for us to focus on.
And obviously, we want to focus not just on the root causes, but also on innovative approaches. On what perhaps we have missed, people in this room who are in influential positions. You on the panel, you're working on the subject matter on a daily basis. What in your opinion have been up until now, and I'm not talking about the United States, globally, the most strategic mistakes that have been made up until now?
The most strategic mistakes in addressing root causes of radicalization. I think that we overconflate the importance of economic factors, especially when we look at the African context. If I can speak to my core area of focus, which we have, hundreds of million people in Africa who are living in extreme situations of poverty and various levels of economic deprivation. The vast majority of them are not involved in a radical or violent extremist organization. And so we have to push past to some of our conventional wisdom and understanding of root causes and really think more carefully about, again, the personal bonds, the social relationships, the group dynamics that take some source of alienation and then become the political entrepreneurs that pull individuals into violent extremist acts.
Now, aside from the word cloud, obviously you're all welcome to chime in through your comments and questions, which will come up on the board. So please make use of it, and I will try to incorporate them as we go along. Dr. Pham, if we look at the current situation today, now the inclination, also on part of journalists like myself, is to say, this is the worst time we've ever been in. This is the most critical time we've ever been in. But if you could put it in a historical context, what we are going through right now, what seems to be one negative, devastating news after another, is that true? Is that actually true? Is this the most, if you will, devastating? Is this the most difficult time when it comes to radicalization that we live in?
Well, it depends on what metric you use, Ali. If your metric is absolute number of lives lost or economic damage caused, we're in a better place than we've been in some time. We're not in a good place, but we're in a better place. But if you look at in terms of the strategic moment and the opportunities that are given both to those who would radicalize and use ideologies, and those who would counter them. I think we are in a very critical, vital point, an inflection point, if you will, of where we could go. And I think the theme of our meeting here is changing mental maps. And I think to address the points that my colleagues have brought up, I think there are two major points that we really need to focus about changing. First is what we do. And that comes under two guises. One is the question you raised. I think it's a very appropriate question. What are the policies that our governments, our societies have that either diminish our credibility of our counter-radicalization message or, conversely, enhance the erroneous message of the other side? Also, what we do, we need to examine critically things that are effective operations, that are effective information operations, and others are simply not effective. And the other thing we need to change, the second big point, change is we need to change and challenge what the radicals are doing. And that needs to be done systematically and comprehensively. And I think we'll probably address this tomorrow when my good friend Ahmed Abadi is here on his panel, but Morocco has a wonderful program that is a model perhaps where that could be imitated or at least studied for other applications.
Mr. Boniface, you wanted to chime in here.
Yes, I want to challenge this point of view because there is no more atrocity than in the past. There is no more risk than in the past, but there is more information about atrocity and about risk. I think that the situation of human rights was much more difficult during colonial wars, and the strategic situation was much more risky during the Cuban crisis or during the Cold War. So, of course, there is a lot of risk, a lot of security challenge, but the situation was worse 13 years ago and 40 years ago than now. And so we need carefully not to overestimate the threat, because otherwise we are giving meat to the others, to our foes. And so we have to really calculate that the problem is we have a lot of information. It's not possible not to kill people and not to be aware of it. In Syria, 30 years ago, the fathers of Bashar has killed 40,000 people in a few days. No one was aware, and no one flew from Syria to come in Europe. But no, every time you have a dramatic situation, you are aware. But you need not to be challenged by that and not to make a confusion between information and the reality of atrocity and risk. The situation is better now than it was 30 years ago. The situation is not good. It's not good, of course, but it is better.
That's an interesting point, which I will give you the opportunity to address in just a moment. But I think it raises a point. Mr. Boniface said the situation, as far as radicalization, if I understand you correctly, is better today than it was 3 decades ago. Can I see a show of hands who agree with him? A few, but you have another 60 minutes to persuade the rest. This is not to say that it's all set in stone. Dr. Pham, do you agree?
Well, I agree insofar as we have more information, but I say information can go both ways. That we have more information if we have the political will to deal with the challenges. But that same information can increase. 30 years ago, no one knew what Assad pair was doing in Homs. Today, that same atrocity, those same abuses, can be used to radicalize elsewhere. So in a sense, there's greater information, but there's also greater risk out there with the diffusion of technology. So I think that's why I say we're in a balance there.
Dr. Knopf?
I was just going to add that I think it's a matter of perspective. We get very focused on radicalization, on violent extremism, on terrorism, and yet it's not the most significant form by a long shot of global armed violence. And even when we look at regionally, it's not the most significant source of violence in probably any of our specific contexts. Certainly it's not the case in Africa. It's a very small proportion of the violence affecting citizens across the continent. As dreadful as the situation with Boko Haram is, and as serious as those casualty rates are, South Sudan has a far more significant impact on citizen security for citizens. And we get very fearful, and radicalization is hyped sometimes in the media and by politicians, but it's challenging, I think, to keep it in perspective.
Not to sound cynical, but is casualty rate the criteria by which we measure whether it's gotten worse or not, or is the threat, it's just a perception that people say, you know what, I'm just not going to go out anymore tonight in this square, or I'm not going to take this flight to here and there, where you see the effects already shimmering in society, Dr. Geigo?
Yes, you know, for a long time, people thought that Africa was exempt of those type of issues or threats. Today, we have 22 African countries that are dealing somewhat with terrorism. All the Sahel region, the northern part of Africa, Central Africa, part of East Africa. So things have, you know, moved in the wrong direction for our continent. And then I believe that we have partly lost the war to terrorism on some aspect, critical aspect. People used to say that it's an asymmetrical war, and then they understood they understood it like on the military side of this fight. But I believe on the intellectual, the theoretical, the ideological part, it's also an asymmetrical war. Those people, they're doing a wonderful job, even in your home, while you're sitting with your child, and they have their, you know, a smartphone or whatever, they're talking to your children. They're changing their mind. They're winning the battle of explaining to them that we live in a very bad world, that your child should do this and that, and you parents are not aware of what is going on in your home. So today, people are like, poverty is the reason for terrorism. I really challenge that statement, because Africa was unfortunately poor since independence, and we do not have any Africans involved in terrorism. Right. Bin Laden was not poor at all. Mr. Baghdadi with his $100,000 watch is not a poor guy. So I think we have to be extremely careful with the rhetoric of what is the root cause of terrorism. I said one day in the African Union in a meeting, if poverty was the root cause, the main central cause, all Africans will be terrorists. And luckily we are not.
Mr. Boniface, if the dinner discussion yesterday brought up one aspect, not necessarily innovative, but certainly crucial, I would say, is the use of technology, use of media that these organizations are resorting to and using to recruit young individuals. Do you say that that aspect is also overestimated, the use of sophisticated media, or would you say that is one of the main causes?
They are the effect, not the cause. So, of course, they could reach everyone at home, and it's not necessary to make a massive rally and so on. But if someone is in good shape, he was not affected by this social media. So I think that social media are not neutral. They could offer the possibility to reach people. But we don't, if we focus on social media, we will forget the roots. And so we need to focus on the roots, not on the channels.
Before I bring in the audience, I want to ask the same question to all of you, because that is the underlying theme, innovative approaches. Mr. Boniface, imagine that you are being put in the Grand Élysée. You are the president of France. I think they're looking for one these days.
There's too many candidates.
So you still have time. You still have time to throw your head in the ring. But if you were in charge, what would be your innovative approach be? Where do you think this is some thinking outside the box that I can provide?
To give more money, more means to intelligence service, because that's the way to fight against terrorism, to give more money to the people who can watch the situation, and to find a common agenda with the media, with the opposition, with political leaders, how to address to the public the terrorism and radicalization issue in order not to increase them by talking too much about them. I was struck in January 2015, Koulibaly, the man would take hostage in a hypercacher. He didn't want to speak to the Minister Interior, he didn't want to speak to the President of the Republic, he wanted to speak to BFM TV. So it's challenging.
Challenging for sure.
For the media and for the political leaders. Because they of course, they know that it's going to make audience and so on. But it's also going to make new recruitments.
Gadio, of course, you were in a position of influence and in a position of political power. In hindsight, do you think this I could have done differently, or this is what I would do if I were in the same seat today?
Yes, I think for Africa, the most innovating new approach that we should have is to come to terms with the fact that there's no single African country that can take care of the problem by itself. Nigeria is our superpower, and you see what happened with Boko Haram. One African country like Chad is doing a wonderful job helping Mali and the Sahel, helping Nigeria, Cameroon, and so on, because they were well aware of security issues long time before the other African countries. They have elite soldiers who can put that type of battle. So my really call for African countries is to understand the concept of mutualization. I don't know if it works in English as it works in French. Mutualization, we have to put together our intelligence, our resources, our military, and fight the fight together, because no single African country, like I said, you saw the situation in Mali, we have to come together. And we have to come to terms once again that trying to build a national army and to catch up with the terrorist threat. And then the terrorists did not come alone. They brought in their baggage, their luggage. They brought what we call the criminal economy. The drug traffickers, narco traffickers, so the whole Sahel region is not only dealing with terror, it's dealing with terror plus. So we have to mutualize, to put our resources together. And our friends from the international community can only bring some support. They cannot fight the fight for us while Africans are sitting in the back seat and waiting for them to do the job. We have to do the job, and we can do the job.
Dr. Knopf, let's hear some of your innovative approaches that you have brought with us here today.
So I've been reflecting on this question, given the title of our session, and I think innovative really depends on the context. It's very hard for us to sit here and generalize across the entire Atlantic region that we're focused on and say this is the innovative thing, I think, to do across the board. We have to understand each context and the dynamics and interplay between them. And then in many cases in Africa specifically, governments need to do their job. They need to provide governance that works for all citizens so that the sources of alienation are fewer, the fissures that violent extremist groups can play upon are lessened and mitigated against, and then societies, religious communities, civil society groups, and what we call credible voices, those who can speak to those populations that are most vulnerable or susceptible to recruitment or to radicalization, they need to stand up and participate as well. So we really need whole of society approaches that are context specific to the challenges in each case.
You say governments need to do their jobs. Now, do you, at the top of your head, can you name one or two countries that have been doing well, best practices, where you say, yes, these are examples where we should be looking at more closely?
Well, I think we're here in Morocco, and Morocco offers us lots of lessons, and hopefully colleagues in the audience will stand up and speak to some of the work that's being done with training imams, etc. I think in Mauritania, they've worked hard to counter extremist ideologies and to have a conversation around that. In Senegal, we've seen the 4 Sufi brotherhoods, I think, really try to work together. Maybe Dr. Gaudio can speak more to that. In Kenya, on the coast, we've seen civil society organizations really work with communities to reward efforts to counter radicalization, to resist recruitment efforts. We've seen the regional coordinator for counterterrorism from the Kenyan government improve relationships between communities and the state so that trust is built and community policing can be more effective and intelligence more timely. So I think we've got a variety of examples across the continent.
Dr. Pham?
I think the innovation we most need is an innovation in how we critically look at the whole range of issues that we look at. And perhaps this is a moment to disabuse ourselves of some of the nostrums. My good friend Dr. Gaudio earlier underlined the dissent. Yes, maybe poverty, maybe underdevelopment predispose or at least facilitate this transmission of a message of radicalization, but poor people are not necessarily radicals or violent. Yet many of our strategies to date in the last 15, 16 years have been based on development. There's nothing wrong with development, but let's be honest. 1, the linkages are tenuous, as my colleagues already said, and 2, they will take time. They will take time, and so the marginal increase or in growth rate or whatever index you choose is not going to affect necessarily any one single individual's decision to radicalize or not. So we have to be realistic what we can expect. Doesn't mean we abandon efforts, but I think we have to rethink how we do this and do a very serious calculus. And I think what Dr. Boniface mentioned earlier is very important as well. The importance of thinking about this strategically rather than tactically or reactively.
Mr. Gadio, you wanted to respond directly?
Yeah, no, just like one innovative approach will be also to discuss the issue of what is really terrorism and what is put into terrorism. One French researcher said something very interesting one day. He said in French, est-ce que ce sont les islamistes qui se sont radicalisés ou est-ce que c'est les radicalisés qui se sont islamisés?
Did Muslim radicalists
radicals or are the radicals who becomes Islamists? When you see those people, those young people, some of them drug addicts, some of them, abusing alcohol and doing all kind of, and then they all of a sudden become, radical so-called Muslims. And then it brings this, stereotypes against the Muslim world, Muslim community. So I'm saying we are missing something in the debate, and Muslims sometimes feel, discriminated against, disrespected. Like when your name is Sheikh Tidiane, like me, in many airports, you are sure that you will have, they will body search you. And I don't think I look like a terrorist, but I don't know what a terrorist looks like. So the other thing...
I tell you, the name Ali is not a winner either. So, I feel your pain.
Ali is a very important name, actually, in Islam. So
yes, the security officials don't agree, but that's it.
No, one last point is the Senegalese experience that she mentioned. We have Muslim brotherhoods, and we have people who are very moderate in their vision of Islam. Our Islam came from Morocco, basically, from the city of Fez here. We are Sufi, very tolerant. In Senegal one day, somebody said that here we are a country of tolerance. And he got hit by everybody telling him we are not a country of tolerance in terms of religion. We are a country of religious harmony. So we even don't agree with the word tolerance. It doesn't translate how we feel about other religious communities. So those are our leaders, they are our reference, and it works for our country. But the thing is, we have to have, once again, a national conversation almost everywhere, especially in Africa. We have to understand what are we dealing with. Those narco-traffickers in Mali have nothing to do with Islam. They're doing business. They're making a lot of money. So that's what we call the criminal economy. We have to understand what it is and what is its link with the so-called terrorist organization.
And I thank you for raising the point and addressing perhaps the elephant in the room, because I think when we're talking about radicalization, at least in the media context, certainly Islam and Muslims are inevitable. There was a question or comment rather up on the wall by Anonymous. The question or the remark, if we can put it up, was actually not that sensitive, that maybe it's a hacker and didn't want to. Anonymous is saying basically people tend to associate radicalization and Islam, put him in one box. Mr. Boniface,
yes, I fully agree with what has been said, because when you look at the man who made the attack in Nice, just before he was an avid drinker, he has bisexual activities, and he was he smoked drugs and so on. So he was not really respecting the rule of Islam. And he was a new convert. And I will say even more that this kind of guy, 10 years ago, he just committed suicide. Not an attack, killing 86 people in Nice on 14th of July. Mm-hmm. And so it was someone who has no meaning in his life and wanted to give some meaning in his death. And to kill other people, because for months he has heard about attacks and to kill other people and so on. And this guy would not have committed a suicide attack 5 years ago, 2 years ago. And I will add also that it's two faces of the same coin, Islamophobia and radicalization. Radicalization creates Islamophobia, and Islamophobia creates radicalization. And just to add to what has been said, that to fight against radicalization, it's easier in society in which you have strong civil society, strong NGOs, strong political activities, social activities. If, of course, also always a pain in the neck for governments. But on the other hand, when you have strong communities, strong social activities, it's much more difficult for radical people to influence the youngster.
And perhaps Anonymous will reveal him or herself by the end of this discussion. Dr. Pham, you wanted to
Yes.
chime in here.
Just to pick up very briefly on the point you made about, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this terrorist in Nice would have ended his own life without taking. I think part of the problem is actually, and here we have to challenge. I am not advocating the suppression of free press, because I think the free press is the guardian of a free society. But I think a free press must be a responsible media. And I think our media in the West in particular makes heroes and makes this more attractive. When we had the San Bernardino attack in California, what did they do? Instead of putting mugshots of the two killers, they put their heroic poses one after another. The same with the Orlando attacker. So our media makes celebrities out of these people, and therefore these people without meaning find meaning, and posthumously heroism, and our media is complicit. I'm not saying don't report it, but do we need to do it so graphically in such a way that it creates an instant moment of fame for someone who is seeking that?
Well, let me take this opportunity to ask a representative from the New York Times, Steve Erlanger here. I know you're loving it that I'm coming up to you here right now, but medias are making celebrities out of these terrorists, is what he's saying. What's your point?
It's a little unjust, but the media is a great collective, and I'm not responsible for all of the media, and I don't work for television, but people are interested in news. They're interested in Kim Kardashian's behind. They're also interested in murderers.
That leads to more terrorism? No.
No. I mean, they're interested in human stories. There was a big debate in France, and perhaps Monsieur Boniface wants to talk about that, about whether Le Monde and other papers should not use the names of perpetrators of terrorism. That doesn't go very far. I mean, it just seems to me we live in America, in a country with a Bill of Rights and a free press, and a free press means a free press for everybody, the responsible as well as the not so responsible. And if you're going to make a distinction between liberty and responsibility, I think we're getting into very deep trouble here.
I don't want to dwell on too long on the media aspect, but obviously Nick is also here with us from television, because print, certainly a different aspect. But is it true Dr. Pham seems to suggest that something like this happens, report on it, but don't, if that's my understanding.
Don't report on it, publish accounts of it, but don't, if you will, lionize the people airing the videos that they've self-produced in advance, etc.
Is that what's happening, Nick?
I'm now a partial member of the collective, but I have joined the collective, having been in this business a very long time. But I think you've got to broaden your perception of the media considerably beyond the BBC, where I used to work, and the New York Times. The host of other sources and platforms, often uncurated, means that we don't have control over what you're concerned about anymore. Certainly where I have worked for many years within the British broadcasting organizations, there are very clear guidelines from Ofcom, which is the authority which oversees. Certain things simply cannot be done, particularly if they can be traced in any way as a source of creating problems for terrorism and radicalism. So it's out of the control of newsrooms. It goes way beyond that, and I would have been saying that even before fake news and post-truth politics. It is now a very different digital space with multiple platforms, and we're only one small part of it.
It's certainly a complicated issue. I tell you what, I'm going to put you three together during tonight's dinner, and then you can hash it out. Let me see. In the audience, I'm sure we have a lot of questions, a lot of remarks to what has been said up until now. The lady has been raising her hands first from Kenya, I see. So.
Yes, and a fellow journalist, a fellow broadcaster. And to speak to your point, I also work for the BBC, and so Nick is right to say that the space is very fragmented. But there are examples of irresponsible reporting which have been dealt with. And so I'll take you to South Africa, for instance, which had these xenophobic attacks. And the same complaint arose that people who were targeting foreigners were being celebrated. And so what happened was that the media organizations came together and decided how they would cover these xenophobic attacks. They would cover the attack, they would not glorify them, but they would also cover the consequences, people going to jail, people facing justice, that sort of thing. In Kenya, we have come under the same sort of criticism. And again, because we're very active on social media, unfortunately, horrific pictures of terrorism have reached the public before the media even gets there. So what's happened now is that there are guidelines, regulations, accounts are traced. If you circulate pictures of terror attacks and the victims, unfortunately, you will be tracked down. So there is room, I think, to sensitize the public and media organizations to the consequences of some of the images that we're broadcasting, but also demystifying what is taking place. That's my contribution. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Certainly you open up a vault with the media question, but an interesting one.
And that's exactly what it's for the media itself, and I think those are wonderful examples.
And this gentleman has been sneaky, getting a microphone on his own. Very good. So I don't have to come to you, you're on.
Okay.
That's one way to get the word.
C'est bon. Ma question, une petite question rapide à Monsieur Gadiou. Est-ce que vous parliez tout à l'heure de création d'une force?
The creation of a unified African force to fight against terrorism. And the second question addressing everybody, aren't we going over the fact that there's this sort of there is a sort of there's this complicity. So in order for terrorist organization to establish itself, we need funds, we need weapons, we need countries that facilitate the transit of these weapons on their territory to reach the targeted area. So is there a sort of hypocrisy today when we are addressing this type of issue? We were even talking about the sort of complicity.
Sure, that was extremely insightful. I don't speak French, so but I take it. The question was addressed to one of you.
If you allow me to say one word about the media issue before I talk about,
please do. Of course.
I will take just then 2 minutes.
One
is about the media issue. We had a problem with our friends from Radio France International when they decided to call Boko Haram the Islamic State of West Africa. We told them that this is extremely dangerous because our youth are being fascinated by the concept and they are trying to go and join the so-called Islamic State in West Africa. We told them there is no Islamic State in West Africa. The people who are victims of Boko Haram, they call Boko Haram Boko Haram. So if you are faithful to the real information, you cannot tell them they were attacked by the Islamic State of West Africa when they don't know what the Islamic State of West Africa means. So we had to put a fight, discussion, argument, and then our friends from Radio France seems to have agreed. Now they have given up on using the Islamic State in West Africa. They only talk about Boko Haram, which is the reality of this organization on the ground. Now, responding to his question, what we proposed is that Africa should have special forces, African special forces, Pan-African special forces in the Sahel region, in the Lake Chad Basin. That's the way to mutualize, to put together our resources so that we can fight terror together, putting our best troops, elite troops, and putting our strategy together. When we said it first 4 years ago, people were laughing. And now we have an African Special Forces being built in Chad to deal with the Lake Chad and then the Sahel region. That's the only way out for us. There's no single army in Africa that can alone take care of the problem. Morocco is doing wonderful. That's maybe one of our, exception. But I'm sure Morocco is also working in terms of intelligence, in terms of, partnership with other African armies and secret services. So that's the only way for us, is to put our resources together. We also propose to the UN. They have $7 billion a year for peacekeeping operations in Africa. We told them if they were to give just $2 billion to African special forces, we can build elite troops and take care of the issue ourselves on the ground. But unfortunately, peacekeeping is also almost a business now, and it's a political economy, and people will not give us that money. But if we had that money, perhaps we can fight the fight ourselves.
Please go ahead, next question.
Thank you. I'm Ludishki. I'm a fellow in the OCPP Center. And in another life, I was ambassador of Morocco to the United Nations, and I had to deal with terrorism. I think when something is obvious, it doesn't mean that you don't have to state it again and again. And I'm referring to what Mr. Boniface said, that we have to dry the sources of conflict in Africa. Conflict in Africa accounts for 65% of the agenda of the Security Council. Secondly, we have to cease to consider that tackling radicalism and terrorism is the government business. It has to be embraced not only by the civil society, but also by the private sector. Private sector has a role to play. And finally, I think when we want to tackle terrorism and radicalism, we have a tendency to duplicate practices that are coming from outside. We do have tools in the traditional society of Africa. We have means to tackle radicalism, but we have a tendency to oversee them and try to get only the recipes that are coming from outside.
Thank you. Dr. Knopf, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I think that to tie these comments together and picking up on the point from the colleague just before, complicity is a very serious issue, and corruption and incompetence certainly enable violent extremist organizations to exist. And so while we can focus on special anti-terrorism units and work on eliminating threats, that doesn't stop them from popping up again. We can play whack-a-mole to the end of time. And so hard security is one aspect, but the two probably most significant things that governments in Africa at least could do would be to end corruption and improve across the board the professionalism and the competence of the security sector.
All right. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. My name is Martina. I'm working with higher consciousness and changing mindsets. I believe you said something about purpose. And I think one of the reasons of radicalization is the youth, lack of purpose. And I'm not just saying the lack of purpose of the person who is radical, but also the knowledge that other people are not following ethics, are not ethical, there's a lot of corruption, etc. So it's really poverty of ethics, or an ethical bankruptcy. And so to deal with that, the question would be, what can we do to help young people or people in general to find a purposeful way of living, which would be ethical, and which other people will not be forced into radicalization of. So I think that's something that we should put our money to, rather than trying to cure symptoms, but to cure the cause of it. And I think the media also plays a big role in that. I don't normally watch news, but I've been watching news the last couple of days. When I got home, it's all negative. How does that paint the world that we see? That's a very dark world. Can we get some more positive stories of role modeling, something that we can actually copy in our daily lives, something that's positive, instead of just talking about the devil, but also talking about the good? So I think the media has a big responsibility.
Steve, Nick, and to all the media representatives out there, it seems to be a business model here. So just reporting positive news. I think that's a good idea. We have that on. You're next, Dominican Republic, right?
Yes, thank you. I'm a from the Dominican Republic. Picking up a little bit on what Mr. Boniface was mentioning on what he would do if he were the French president. And he said a little bit about security service and, giving them more white powers. How do you see that happening, and how do you see that being innovative in an age where it is increasingly difficult to actually monitor what people do? I mean, even conversations on WhatsApp are encrypted nowadays, and it is increasingly difficult to monitor social media and what citizens do. Is over-relying on security service, over-relying on intelligence a problem? Is that innovative nowadays?
It's not innovative because it's always been done, but we need to do it. But we must also say to the public there is no zero risk. I think that political leaders must go to the public and say, I could promise you there is no more attacks during next year. And we have to live with this risk. We are living with other risk. And I am living near Bel-Equipe, in which there is 13 people killed 13th of November. Iris office is 3 blocks away, Bataclan. But I am most fearful for my kids when they are going outside for a weekend in a car than when they are going outside to have a drink. We have had 250 killed people by attacks last year. It's every weekend on the road we have the same level of people, and we are living very comfortably with that. And of course, it's freedom press. But every time we are putting in front page this kind of risk and not other risk, you are taking plane, and you accept to take a risk by taking plane. So we must admit that we have to live with security risk, and it's just a risk among others. And if we overestimate it, we are just helping the terrorists. In 62, Raymond Aron, who was in this time the most influential intellectual, have said regarding Algerian war, the terrorist attack have more important mediatic impact than strategic ones. It's still true. And so we have to relativize the terrorist risk and terrorist factor.
3 microphones, unless...
No, just wanted to touch on the issue she mentioned about African youth.
Of course.
I really believe that our government should be aware that you cannot have a continent like Africa with 1 billion people, more than 60% of them being young Africans, and then you can only sell them or give them despair, lack of hope. You know, the rate of unemployment in some African countries is like 50% or even more. Our government should be careful about the fact that the policies they have can lead our youth to go to either terrorism or the migration crisis or the narco-traffickers, because they are not given any other option. Education crisis in our education system, crisis in agriculture, people are not fed. When you don't eat, you're ready to challenge the sea, the Mediterranean Ocean, the desert, to go anywhere because you're fighting to survive. So our government should be aware that they have a big responsibility in the crisis of the African youth. Africa should have taken its youth as an asset. The youth is perceived as a burden, as a problem. They don't know how to manage our youth. So our intellectuals, our youths are going to work for Europe, for America, they're going everywhere, and we are losing, and that will keep Africa still being poor and lagging behind. So we need to talk to our leaders. Africa has a deep crisis of leadership, and that explains also why our youth is totally desperate.
And to address the demographic issue, because demographic growth, which is presented as a strength for Africa, it's a burden. Because income per capita will be lowered with double digital growth. You have 7 children by women in Nigeria, in Mali, it's just too much.
But my friend, the problem is, if a woman has to have 7 children, to save 2 or 3 of them, they will have 7 children.
Not yet.
No, I'm serious. Not yet. I'm serious, because this is an issue. Africa, China had like all these, like this demographic explosion or whatever the name is. They did well because they had a plan. They had a strategy for their development. Africa doesn't have a strategy for its development. Africa doesn't have a strategy for its security. We have all these problems. That's why I'm talking about a lack of leadership or a crisis of leadership. But we cannot tell African women that if you have more children, it's a burden for the continent. We have the most resourceful continent in the world. We have 1/3 of the world's natural resources. We have water. We have arable land. We have everything we need to be the most developed continent in the world. And Africa is a continent where poor people live in a rich continent. That's the real issue. It's not the issue of our women giving birth to 7 kids or 10 kids. I totally disagree.
Clearly a subject matter that keeps on giving, if you will, as time goes on. But unfortunately, also time is limited also for this particular panel. So time is running out. So I know that 3 microphones have already been taken out of my hands and distributed. So I would ask the next 3 speakers kindly to keep it precise and keep it short so we can all bring it in before we wrap it up. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Hello? Oh, sorry. Tim Retta from the German Marshall Fund. On the media conversation, I think Peter's really right that it's important to have this conversation, but we do need to be sensitive because everyone's, I mean, I'll be honest, in the US, everyone's on the defensive now. We're worried about where our country's going. People are scared. You do need to disaggregate what the media is, and the New York Times is not Fox News. But we also need to be able to say that Fox News is bad for our country, and maybe CNN is, and maybe some of the programs like, there is a certain, and I'm using my liberty and my freedom of speech to say, I think there's really bad journalism out there, and it's crafting this perception that the world is collapsing, and no wonder Americans are panicking. They think that Daesh is at their doorstep all the time. So that's real. We have to be able to talk about it, being sensitive to, First Amendment protections and how much we value that, but also the First Amendment also means I can criticize bad media. So I think we have to have this conversation in a healthy way. It hasn't been healthy, but we have to be able to do it.
So the role of the media clearly has touched the nerve here in this audience. The gentleman, please.
Yeah, and that's what I like to talk about. I'm a Brazilian journalist, and I cover terrorism and conflicts. And your example about Boko Haram is perfect. It's not up to journalists to name groups. It's the groups themselves who name themselves. So they named themselves Boko Haram. It's not up to us to change the name of Islamic State. It's a very good propaganda, but that's the one they chose. We already criticized for calling them, that's their name. So we cannot change the fact that a terrorist, before perpetrating a terrorist attack, posed himself as a hero. That's part of the story and part of the way to understand his motivation is. Our only task is try to help people understand what happened and not change reality. That's too much for us. Don't expect that from us, for hiding realities or to change them.
All right, gentlemen.
William Zarpin from Johns Hopkins. We're all having fun dumping on the media, and I think they deserve it, but we're not getting much to the core of the problem. How do you, with innovative approaches, deal with a religious message that justifies and glorifies taking one's frustration to the point of taking one's life and other people's life with them? We are all frustrated in life for some reason or other, but we try to do something about it, or at least accept it. But this is a new step, an important step that takes people to look for improvement in the immediate beyond. And that's a captivating approach, appeal to action. How do you deal with it?
And I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond in the final wrap-up. First, taking the last couple of questions. Go ahead, please.
Sure, Miguel Diaz. In the spirit of the Atlantic dialogues and the search for innovative solutions, let me there bring into the conversation the youth violence in Central America. You have there youth gangs that fit the same profile of the radicals in that part of the world who are killing even more people in that part of the world than here. Amongst radical professionals, which you are, where does that fit in terms of radicalization? Where do the youth gangs of Central America number in the tens of thousands and kill even many more people fit into the whole discussion of radicalization?
And my sincere apologies to many in the audience who've raised their hands, whom I was not be able to include due to time constraints. We're going to wrap it up now with the last comment or question from this lady here. Please go ahead.
Thank you. The big question is who finances the terrorism? We have not addressed that. We know it is Saudi Arabia that finances, Pakistan trains, and the US controls the narrative. Ever since Daniel Pearl died was killed following the shoe bomber, nobody has bothered to follow the money, and I'd like to know why not.
All right, thank you. So a potpourri of questions and comments, and all of you I will call upon to wrap this session up. Perhaps we go counterclock this time. Dr. Pham, the prominent media critic that you will be known for after this session, but go ahead, please.
Well, I don't think I'm going to say anything more on the media other than what was said earlier by Tim, which is I think this is a conversation that needs to take place and should take place. And there are case studies and there are examples, like a colleague from Kenya brought up, that are to be cited, not only examples from Northern Atlantic, from Europe and North America, but also Africa, of positive outputs, and leave it at that. But I'd like to address Professor Zartman's question, which I think, as he always does, he gets us to the heart of the matter in many cases. And I think it is, we tend, and this is I think an error on the part of elites, especially in the West, that being largely secularized and not having a religious or theological vision, we fail to recognize that even if it's a false or erroneous religious vision, it is still a religious vision of some sort. And it can only be combated, and this is coming back to the point I made at the beginning, of examining what we do and what the enemy does. We have to get back to how do we credibly counter a religious or spiritual narrative with an authentic one. And that's not going to come from the outside. It's going to come from within. And here, Morocco has a wonderful example in what is done here in the embrace of an inclusive version of Islam with the Maliki rite, the Shafi jurisprudence, the Sufi spirituality, what the Mohammed VI Foundation has done to train imams in other parts of Africa. That's one example, and there are other examples we could find. It's within Africa itself and among Africans that these, or at least for Africa, the solutions are to be found. And in the case of Latin America, I'm not an expert on Latin America, but I presume the solutions are from within. And that's what we need to look for and acknowledge them for the reality that they are. And I think Professor Zartman brings us to that point.
Dr. Knopf?
I just add to that there's a very interesting article just out in the Journal of Conflict Resolution that looks at evidence from Kenya of religious radicalization of both Muslim and Christian populations in the Eastleigh neighborhood. And it finds exactly that it's the social processes, the identification of intensity of religious identification that's important, and social connections that matter most in terms of either Muslim or Christian individuals becoming radicalized to the point of being willing and able to take a violent act against other citizens. And so we do need those credible voices who are religious leaders, who are thought leaders. We have to counter ideas with ideas. And governments and states are sometimes not the best voices to do that.
Srigadio, let's take your final words.
When some people tend to blame Islam itself as a religion, they are not taking care of the problem. And the Muslim who also respond that our religion is a religion of peace and love, therefore we are not responsible of what is going on, those people also are not helping. I think we have a serious problem and we need to dig deep into that problem, try to understand it. In Islam, it is said somewhere in the Quran that every time you assassinate one human being, you have assassinated the entire humanity. If God in Islam wants human life to be protected at that level, then somebody speaking on behalf of Islam and on behalf of God, exploding a bomb in a bus and killing, people, is not acting on behalf of Islam. He's acting on behalf of an ideology. I really believe that some people have created an ideology out of Islam or out of their reading of Islam or their interpretation of Islam. What I'm complaining about is that they have taken the upper hand, and while people are not responding to them at the beginning, if you take the case of Africa, in 1973, when we had this first huge drought, Some countries, Muslim countries, send people to Africa to come and bring some help. They do not only bring aid and help, they brought also their vision of Islam, their radicalism, and all of that. And we did not pay attention to that. So what I'm saying is Christianity also has had its time in history where terrible things were done on behalf of Christianity. As a Muslim, I believe that Jesus is a prophet of love and human harmony and so on. So I will not follow people who say that because of the teaching of Jesus, Christians have done this and that. Those people who do what they are human beings, and they are sometimes politically motivated, and they're using our religion, Islam. Lastly, blaming Saudi Arabia or blaming Iran or blaming other countries, I don't think will take care of the problem. The reason is we also in Africa especially have questions about the regime change in Libya. Who decided the regime change in Libya? The UN decision to create a no-fly zone ended up being we have to get rid of Gaddafi. We have to change the regime in Libya to bring liberty, freedom, democracy to Libya. Where is that freedom? Where is that democracy? And the whole Sahel region, more than 10 countries are now, they have their knees down because of that policy. And the US reaction also to September 11 in Iraq. Everybody knows what the regime change has brought also as issues. So we have to discuss the whole thing, not just blame Saudi Arabia or blame Iran. We have to discuss the entire world geopolitics and how people view power and domination and relation between countries. The whole thing has to be challenged and the whole thing has to change. Thank you.
Yes, it's true that Saudi Arabia has created a monster, Fragility, which is now out of control and which is attacking Saudi Arabia. But I fully agree with you, there is other causes. We have to blame Saudi Arabia for their past behavior, but the French in Libya and the US in Iraq has made also strong mistakes. So we have to not to blame only one camp, but we have collective responsibility. And secondly, it's not, of course, it is mostly in name of Islam that attacks have been made now, but because it's a strategic moment. And because most of the crises are in Muslim countries. And when Anders Breivik has killed 80 young Norwegian people, I was not concerned as a Christian, or supposed to be Christian. And we didn't ask in this time to every Christian, are you agree with Anders Breivik or not? Why all the Muslims should be accountable for Ben Laden or al-Baghdadi, etc. We have to separate and to take care of that, because once again, Islamophobia and radicalization are the two faces of the same coin.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think I speak for all here in the audience when I say that this discussion could have gone on for the next 4 days and we probably still would not have come to a conclusive answer as to how to approach this and how to battle this phenomenon that we call radicalization, which by all accounts, and for better or worse, will be with us for some time to come. I think that is for certain. But for now, I want to thank you out there for your active participation, for your inputs in driving this discussion along, and first and foremost, and that's how we conclude, of course, a big round of applause for the spectacular panel. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for a brief coffee break in the Grand Foyer. But please return in 30 minutes. We have 2 back-to-back spectacular panels, Atlantic Security, Risks, Fragility, and Paths to Resilience, followed by Defining the Unthinkable, Europe After Brexit. Enjoy the coffee break.